Today is a special day, and as opposed to me telling you why it's a special day, I was hoping you might be able to give me some insights in terms of why I may think it's a special day. What was that, Aaron? Easter. Yep, it's certainly one of them. And it's Easter Sabbath, the day that God rested, and I quite like what Simon said there. I'm quite pleased that none of you guys are resting today either, and tomorrow is going to be so much better when we celebrate when Christ risen. But that's not the one that I had in mind, although it's related to it. What else is special about today? It's Passover. And must have read my mind. It's Passover. Passover started on last night, effectively, because that's when the day starts, isn't it? According to the Bible, it starts in the evening, in the morning, with the first day of the week. It says in Genesis, and so Passover actually started on Friday night, or our Friday night, and today is the first day of Passover. And I thought it was important that we have a look at the first day of Passover as it occurred many thousand years ago, because basically it was looking forward to the time when Jesus would come and be the true Passover lamb. And so today, if you bear with me, I want to have a look, as I said, at the very first Passover, but we compare that with when Christ came and was the true Passover lamb about 2,000 years ago. The Passover was a festival, was one of the, I suppose, main festivals that the Jewish people had. And the purpose of this particular festival was specifically to look for Jesus' first coming. Although they may not have truly recognised that, and we see that they hadn't truly recognised that, because they were expecting something different when Jesus first came. They were expecting that Jesus would come and would conquer the Romans, as opposed to looking that Jesus would come and actually conquer something so much more greater. And he would conquer Satan, would conquer death, would provide us a victory going forward. So the background, a little bit of background in terms of the first Passover time. The children of Israel had been in Egypt. They'd been in Egypt for about 400 years. They had gone to Egypt as honoured guests. They'd actually saved Egypt. One of their very own was second in charge of Egypt. But things had changed. They were now seen as being outcast. They were now in slavery. They had lost sight of Jehovah. They had wished for a better life. One of the people, Moses, was adopted into Pharaoh's family, but he got a little bit headstrong and wanted to do some stuff his own way, and God had to actually go out and send him away to be re-educated. And he came back a lot more humbler person, ready to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. But there was a problem. God had called Moses to lead his people out, but Pharaoh wasn't willing to let him go. Pharaoh had become drunk on the success written on the back of the Israelis and the work that they'd done. The Egyptian nation had become very, very mighty because of what the Israelis had brought to them. Moses had pronounced 9 different plagues on the Egyptian people. The first 3 actually impacted, as we know, both the Egyptians as well as the Israelis. The previous 6 had only impacted in terms of the Egyptians only. But as it says on the TV, but wait, there's more. And there was one more to come. And it was so much worse than all the others that had preceded it. And that's what I want to focus on today. And if you want to turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 11, we'll pick up the story there in Exodus 11. And basically, we're going to be sticking around Exodus 11 and Exodus 12 for most of the day. Not for most of the day. I promise that I won't preach that long, but for our time here together. So in Exodus chapter 11, verses 4 to 7, it says, Then Moses said, Thus says the Lord, About midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, they shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who's behind the handmill, and the firstborn of the animals. God doesn't discriminate, does he? Basically, this punishment was going to go to everyone. In verse 6, and then it says, And then there shall be a great cry throughout the land of Egypt, such as what there's not been before, and nor shall there be like this again. And I can imagine that, because basically all these families are going to be impacted. Every single household was going to be impacted. And the worst thing about it was that it was foretold in terms of what was going to happen. In verse 7 it says, But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue against man or beast, and that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and the Israelis. How would you feel about this sort of announcement if you were Pharaoh? If you were the leader of this great nation? If this upstart, I can't even call him a young upstart because he was about 80 at the time, if this upstart came into your palace and made this announcement in terms of this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to occur to your most precious person, to your oldest son. And not only to you, but it's going to occur throughout your whole nation. What if you were an Egyptian? What would you think about it? And it's interesting in the verses in around this area, it talked about how the Egyptians looked up to Moses and how he was well respected. How would this message come across to you? It would cut pretty hard to your heart, I would think. Why was God willing to punish all the Egyptians and just not Pharaoh? Why was he going to take Pharaoh's son? Why not just hurt Pharaoh himself? There are so many questions sitting in around this, and I don't have the answers to all of them. But I think sitting in here, we can see that basically the whole Egyptian nation must have been in cahoots with Pharaoh in terms of their treatment towards Israel. And the way that they had treated them, the way that they've used Israel for their benefit. On the flip side, how would you feel if you were an Israeli? Would you have embraced this idea of what was occurring? Would you be happy about what was to occur? Would you feel a bit of sadness towards what you believe was going to occur towards the Egyptians? Would you actually be nervous? Would you actually believe that God was able to save your firstborn as opposed to what occurred with what was going to be pronounced in terms of the Egyptians' firstborn? Would you be comfortable that God could do that for you, that could protect you? And I suppose in some respects, there's a bit of reassurance sitting in there because remember that I said the first 3 plagues affected everyone there in Egypt, and the previous 6 to this one only impacted on the Egyptians. So there was some confidence in there, I would imagine, that what God says that he would do in terms of the plagues, because God announced every time before the plague would occur, this is what's going to happen, that God would follow through on his word and would follow through and complete what he said that he would do. So I think through that there would be a level of reassurance to the Israelis that what God says he will do. And my question to you is, do you have that reassurance as well? Do you have that reassurance that what God has said that he would do for you, that he will follow through on it? We've got a Bible here full of promises. So not every single verse is a promise, but quite a number of them are a promise. And there's still some promises still to be played out. And one that I want to touch on as we go through today's talk together is there's still a promise that Jesus will come back a second time and that he will take us to heaven. Do you have that assurance in and of yourself with the evidence that you've seen in terms of what God has said that he would do in the past, that he's followed through in terms of those examples, that give you confidence that what he has said will happen in the future will occur? It gives me great confidence. And I hope it does for you too. But let's have another look at the wording in around at Exodus chapter 11, verse 5. And I'm going to be, I think we had a couple of English teachers up the front here today, leading it in our worship service. I'm not a good English scholar, so if I get it wrong, just ignore me and give me a bit of grace. If I got it right, please stay with us. In chapter 11, verse 5, let's read the wording very carefully in there. In verse 5, it says, "It was not all of the firstborn of the land of Egypt shall die," but it says, "all the firstborn in the land of Egypt will die." Not of Egypt would die. Yes, chapter 11, verse 5. And in there is a difference in terms of the word "in." The word "in," I would read that as being only applicable to not only the Egyptians, but also to the Israelis. If the Bible had used the word "of," it would then tend to mean, in my mind, those who were born Egyptian as opposed to those who were born Israelis. The divine sentence of judgment included the Israelis equally with the Egyptians. But in verse 7, we're told something a little bit differently. It talks about there that not a dog shall move his tongue against any of the children of Israel, for the Lord put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. Do we have a contradiction here in the Bible? The word of truth? Or do we need to look at this a little bit differently? I would propose that the universal condemnation comes from the righteousness of God, and the difference which God put between the Egyptians and Israel was the outflow of his grace. But how can justice and mercy be reconciled? How can justice exact its full due without excluding mercy? How can mercy be manifested except at the expense of justice? This is really the problem that is raised here. But not only here, but it is repeated continually throughout history. And it is with us today as well. The particular solution for this situation, I believe, is found in Exodus chapter 12. We will find out how all the firstborn of the land of Egypt did die, and yet the firstborn of Israel were delivered from the angel of death. So we have a look at Exodus chapter 12, and we see there that Moses and Aaron gather all the people in verses 1 and 2. In verse 2 it says, "This month shall be a beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." This event, which is about to occur, was a very significant event. So much so that it was going to change the course of history. So much so that it was actually going to change their calendar. The negative impact that would have been on the families in Egypt. Imagine every household in Egypt having the firstborn child and animals die. On the flip side, there would be no deaths for the Israelites, for those who follow God's direction. This would be the beginning of freedom for the Israelites, a new life. No wonder there was going to be a change in their calendar, for the whole world for them was about to be changed. About 2,000 years ago, another significant event occurred, and that is directly related to the Passover, and we talked about it there before. Jesus, our Saviour, our Passover lamb, was sacrificed for us, and therefore he paid the price for our sins. We only have to accept this gift. He died at the time of the Passover, at the time when the Passover was to be sacrificed, the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed. God's love for us and his desire to redeem us was so great that he was willing to die for us. Jesus' death for me and for you was and still is a significant event. As we accept Jesus' gift of his death, we are all given a new start in life. Past sins, misdoings, wrongs are now covered by Jesus' death and his blood through the eyes of God. We too can celebrate from being slaves to sin and the oppressor of Satan to being free in Jesus. In verse 3 of chapter 12, it starts off saying, "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month, every man should take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, and a lamb of the household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbour next to his house take it according to the number of persons, according to each man's need. You shall make your count for the lamb." So what was happening here was basically God wanted to make sure that no one missed out. If your family was big enough, that's cool. One lamb will suffice. If you're a small family, but then combined with other people. This is such an important thing. It was actually a life and death matter, and God didn't want anyone to miss out on the opportunity of what was about to occur. In verse 5 it says, "Your lamb shall be without blemish. It shall be a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight." A lamb from either the sheep or the goats was to be chosen days before the sacrifice. It was to be put aside and brought in to the household. It was to be known by the household, and I dare say loved by the household. 3 to 4 days the lamb was to be with them. The lamb was to be perfect lamb, not one that was of no use or about to be discarded. It was to be male. The lamb was not too old. It was not too young. It was to die at its most vibrant. Jesus came into this world. He was chosen by God to die for our sins. However, we often overlooked that Jesus was also chosen to die by popular demand. By popular demand of the people. If you remember, the people had a choice between him dying and Barabbas dying, and they chose for Jesus to die. He was perfect. The Bible talks about there was no sin found in him. In fact, I want to go a little bit stronger than that. There was actually no sin in him. He was without blemish. He was amongst the people in his public ministry for 3.5 years, starting at the baptism of John the Baptist. He was God's only begotten Son. In his coming, we saw an expression of God's love for each one of us. He was in his mid-30s, at the prime of his life. He was killed on the 14th of Nisan, at twilight, at the appointed time of the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. He was sacrificed once and for all. for all time, for everyone, to redeem and to protect us from eternal death and to give us eternal life. That's if we were to accept the gift that's there. Coming back to Exodus 11, verse 5, I believe we now have the solution in terms of the contradiction that may be there. On the Passover night, there will be death in all households. For some, unfortunately, the death was going to be of the firstborn child. For others, it was the perfect lamb that would take the place of the firstborn son as a sacrifice. Both justice was fulfilled, but grace was also available for those who would choose it. And I believe the same is available for us. If you want to keep your finger there in Exodus, I'll get you to turn to Romans chapter 3. Here, Paul, I believe, alludes to this, actually more than alludes, he actually talks about this specifically. In Romans chapter 3, verses 23 through to 26, Paul says, "For all have sinned, and all fall short of the glory of God." Every single one of us. Verse 24 continues, "Being justified freely by his grace, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation or as an atoning sacrifice or as a suitable substitute by his blood, through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed." In verse 26, to demonstrate that at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier, the one who has faith in Jesus. We have had this dilemma throughout the course of time in terms of how does God's justice prevail, and yet enabling us to be saved and not receive the just deserts of our sins. And it's only through his mercy and only through us accepting a substitute on our behalf do we receive that. This, in essence, is the gospel and is available for each one of us. Where God's justice is satisfied, where God's grace can be experienced by those who accept it. And I'm so pleased to say that that I think that God's grace is so much more powerful than his justice, and he provided a way out. Just when Satan thought he had God snookered, God has got a plan, a much deeper plan for each one of us. If we go back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 7, it says, "And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts, on the lintel of the houses where they eat it." This is what was going to happen to the blood. And I just want us to skip down a couple of verses to verses 21 to 23, because there it expands a little bit more in terms of what was going to happen. It says in verse 21, "Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, Pick out and take your lambs for yourselves according to your families and kill the Passover lamb." In verse 22, "Then you shall take a bunch of hyssop, and you will dip that hyssop into the blood that is in the basin, and you will strike the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin." And this next part's quite important. "None of you shall go out of the door." You need to stay in after this has occurred. You need to stay protected. That's effectively what he's saying. "None of you shall go out through the door of this house until the morning, for the Lord will pass over and strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood of the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into the houses to strike you." There are a number of interesting things in this passage, or at least I find them interesting. Hopefully you guys will too. So I just want to explore with you. So bad luck. You're going to have to listen. or you can turn off if you want. The blood of the lamb was painted above the door and on each doorpost. If I was to do this, I think I would be wanting to make sure that the blood was well and truly seen. I would lavish the blood onto the door and not actually worry about the odour or the smell that the blood would actually come. I would want to make sure that my boys were protected from what was about to occur. This was to be a mark, a symbol, that this household belonged to God. And through that, then the angel of death was not to enter this house. He was to pass over this house. In Revelation, we read about how there are two marks that are given. One is a mark if you belong to God, and the other mark is a mark if you don't belong to Him. The mark for those that belong to God will mean that they will spend eternity with God and have eternal life and will be free and will have a new life. The other mark leads to eternal death. I know which mark I want, and I hope it's the same mark as what you guys want to have in your life. In verse 22, now I've got a couple of scholars in the audience, and I wasn't expecting to have some scholars in the audience, so if I got this wrong, you can tap me on the shoulder afterwards. If I got it right, you can. That's good too. But in verse 22, there's an interesting word that's used there for the storage or for the collection of the blood. It's been translated in the English to basin or vessel, a holding vessel. And it's interesting that the original word is sap, which according to some scholars is based on an old Egyptian word. And the old Egyptian word basically meant the step before the door or the threshold of the door. In other words, the sap provided the household with protection in terms of not allowing the water to come into the house. And in some places it formed part of the gutter that ran past the house. I would imagine, this is me speculating a little bit at the moment, so be with me. I would imagine that the lamb actually wasn't killed inside the house. I would imagine that the lamb was probably killed at the threshold of the door. I would imagine that there was blood all over the front of the door. And I would imagine that not only was there blood on the top of the lintel and on the two side posts of the lintel, but I would imagine that there was also blood on the bottom of the door. And the reason why I would suggest that is when Jesus died on the cross, 2,000 years or many years later, 1,500 years later, Jesus had blood on his head through the rose, through the thorny crown. We know that Jesus was nailed to the cross with his hands on both sides. We also know that Jesus' feet were also nailed to the cross. There was blood everywhere. And I can imagine that there was blood everywhere around this door. We often think that the word Passover comes from the fact that the angel passed over the house that the blood had been applied to. And that provides a very good picture as well, and a very, very good description. The word Passover comes from the word Pishak and Pashak. One's a noun and the other one's a verb, as I would understand it. But it's interesting that they don't have any other connection to any other Hebrew word. And as I was looking at this a little bit further, some scholars Maybe they're not the right scholars, I don't know, but I quite liked what it was that they said, and that's why I thought I would share it with you. Said that this word related very closely to an Egyptian word called pesh. Pesh in the Egyptian language means spread the wings over, to protect. Do we see this elsewhere in the Bible? And I believe that we do. In Isaiah chapter 31 verse 5 we read, "As the birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Israel. Defending also he will deliver it, and passing over," which comes from the same root word as Peshka, "he will preserve it." I propose to you that Passover is more than just flying over. I propose to you that Passover is about God actively intervening and wanting to protect those who have taken on his blood, to protect those that have taken his symbol and his sign. God is an active God. God is actively ensuring that the angel of death doesn't go into that household where this blood is. And the wonderful thing is that God is willing to protect us today as well. God is actively defending us from Satan. He has eternal life on the offer for us as long as we accept and surround ourselves with his sacrificial blood. I'm also reminded of a passage there in Luke chapter 13 verse 34. Where Jesus said, well, actually didn't say, he was crying out. He said, "Oh Jerusalem, how often have I wanted to gather you children together as a hen gathers its chicks under its wings. But you did not want to come." God's wings are there for us. Do you want to be under his wings? Or do you want to be out flying solo? I know where I'd rather be. I'd rather be under his wings, under his protection, under his guidance. In verse 8 it says, "Then we shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, and the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs, and they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boil at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head and its legs and its entrails. You shall not leave anything till the morning. Whatever is left there will be burnt." Verse 11, "And thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist and sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." There's a whole lot of symbolism in there that I'm just going to skip right over, but I'm just going to look at a couple of things here. Not only was the lamb to be killed, but it was to be eaten. It was to become a part of them. It was to bring them sustained energy and strength. When Jesus came, he described himself as being the bread of life, and he invited us to eat of him, again to sustain and to give us energy and strength. The lamb had to be cooked on a fire and not cut up and boiled. None of Jesus' bones were broken, and he was subjected to the full hostility of Satan and the consequences of our sins. Eating of the lamb was to be done in anticipation of leaving very soon afterwards. They were to have the belt on their waist, sandals on their feet, staff in their hands. All of this indicated that a journey was about to occur. It wasn't to be a relaxed meal this time. It was one to be eaten hastily. And this leads me to challenge myself in terms of, am I ready for what God wants from me? Are you open to God's calling and his leading? In all of your actions, in all of your appearances, in all that you do, are you showing others what you believe God will be doing for you? Are you prepared for him to come and to take you to be with him forevermore? In verse 12 it says, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and as we read previously, at midnight or around midnight, and will strike at the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be a sign for you in the household where you are, and I will see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. That night, many, many years ago, Nisan 15, equivalent to tonight, something was going to happen. If you had a substitute that was sacrificed, accepted his blood on your behalf, then you would be saved from death and will gain freedom. Otherwise, you would experience death in your household. What a choice. What would be your choice? And it reminds me that there is a day that is coming, another day that is coming. Some actually refer to it that this will start at midnight as well. The Passover night occurred on a full moon night. It was not totally dark. The future event that I'm thinking of, at midnight it will be lit up with the glory of the returning Jesus and his angels. It will be brighter than any full moon or any sun that we would experience. As was the case many years ago, the Passover lamb has been killed. For the Israelites, it was only hours before. For us, it was about 2,000 years ago. Have you accepted Jesus' sacrifice? Have you accepted his atoning blood? Have you accepted Jesus as being part of your life? Have you accepted God's mark on your life? If so, when Jesus comes for the second time, you will be collected by his angels and gathered to be with Jesus for a journey of freedom, eternal life with God. The alternative, as was the eternity for the Egyptians, is not a good option. And I suggest that you don't take it up. It is of death and eventually eternal death and separation from God. What is your choice? I know what mine is. And I hope that you will be joining me in accepting God's atoning gift. I just want to finish off with a small story. I don't know how true the story is. There's multiple versions of the story, but I'm going to tell you my version of the story, and you can look it up. And like I said, there's multiple versions of it. I'm going to ask Jeff to put a picture up on the screen. On the picture, been floating a little bit around the internet, I think, recently. But you see the person on my right-hand side, not actually the person, supposed to be representing the devil. And here he is playing a game of chess against us mere mortals as such. And it looks like there that the devil's quite smug and he thinks that he's got this guy pretty well beat. And in fact, the name of the painting is called Checkmate. And it was hanging up in the museum in the Louvre, as I would understand, at least his versions of the story. That's where it was. And as the story goes, there was a grand chess master that came through and was looking at this picture and studying this picture, and he was part of the tour. The rest of the tour continued on, and he was standing there watching and observing the picture and thinking stuff through. And so the story goes, he recognised that this person that would represent us, that looked all right and everything else, he actually wasn't in checkmate. There was still one more move for the king. And as the story goes, the people came back and he talked about how this person here that looked like he was about to lose actually wasn't about to lose, he was actually about to win. God has got one last move, always has one last move for each one of us. When Jesus died on the cross, Satan would have thought, my goodness, how good is this? I have won. But God had one last move. And Jeff, can I get you to put up the next picture? God's last move was actually to raise Jesus from the dead. And as Simon mentioned there before, I'm so pleased that he was risen from the dead, because basically while he may have died for us, as it talks about there in Acts chapter 2, God rose him from the dead because basically the ground couldn't hold him. And in and through that we have assurances in and of ourselves that people that we've loved who have died and who have died in Christ, we have assurances that they too can be risen from the dead. If we are unfortunate to die, or maybe it's fortunate in some instances to die before Christ comes back, we can have that assurance that there is still one move that God has got for us, that we will be raised from the dead. The move that God played out in terms of the Passover time was the move in terms of grace. The move is available for each one of us to accept. And that is so much more powerful than the move that Satan believes he's got us in terms of checkmate. We're about to die. I just ask you to bow your heads where you are, and we'll just have a word of prayer together. Lord God, thank you for the Passover. Thank you that you're an active God who actively wants to save each one of our lives. Thank you for your willingness to come and die on the cross for us. Thank you for your willingness to give it to us as a gift. May each one of us accept that gift, Lord. Thank you for being actively involved in terms of continuing to want us to be saved. Lord God, we're looking forward to the time when Jesus comes back for a second time to claim us, to give us eternal life on a journey that will be rushed. May each of us be ready, Lord, for that journey. May we receive your mark on our lives, Lord, so that everyone knows that we belong to you and to no one else. Lord God, I'm so grateful that you have one last move for each one of us. We're not in checkmate. The King can move, and we're so grateful that you do. And we're so grateful that you have. And we're looking forward to the time again when you come again to take us to heaven, to claim us as your very own. Be with us and bless us throughout this Easter period, throughout this Passover period too, Lord God. We just ask this in your name. Amen.